Hey, love. Welcome back to another episode of Lessons from Behind My Chair. I'm your host, Angela B. Fuller, master hairstylist turned certified life coach. Today is First Sunday, and First Sunday is the episode that we do every first Sunday of the month to talk about our spiritual growth. And so today the topic is about being intentional when we are asking God for clarity. And so I'm excited to dive in. But before we dive in, I have a pop question for you. And that question is, how often are we pausing to ask God for the things that we want to see happen in our life? I know that, we have lived long enough, we've had enough life experiences to know what we want, and to, take on some of the tasks that we need to do to make it happen. Maybe going back to school, maybe reading a good book, maybe asking a friend or a confidant. But how often do we pause and just ask the very being that created us what is next for our lives? And that is what I want you to contemplate. I want you to ponder that. Are you asking God on a regular basis what is next for your life? And so when I tell you that God sees and hears us, that He is still in the business of answering prayers, and I don't care how big or how small our prayers are, our questions are, we can be rest assured that God has the answer and that He will answer us. But I think the challenge is, that we have to be open to the clear clues that God gives us. Because many a times we get answers, but we have so much noise going on around us that we fail to hear what He is saying. And I can say this because just the other day, Thursday, as a matter of fact, December the 1st, it was my birthday. And I took off from the salon because, hey, I wanted to celebrate my birthday the way I wanted to celebrate it. And so I spent a little time with my daughter. I spent a little time with my husband, but I also spent some time alone being pampered and taking care of myself. And so on the way to the nail salon to get my manicure done and my pedicure done, I was just in full gratitude. And I was just thanking God, and thinking about how my life is unfolding, and just sitting in a state of gratitude for all the things, most of the things that I had prayed for was coming to pass. But there was something on my mind that I was asking God about. And about a year ago, my daughter and I started having, just before going to work, spending about 20 minutes or so having coffee and conversations, just coffee and talking about life and how our life was unfolding and what some of our dreams were, some of our fears. And so about 5 days out of 7 mornings, we would sit and have coffee and just talk about life. And after about 8 months of that, we were just wondering, wouldn't this be nice to have a podcast that's for mothers and daughters? Having a podcast where the two of us could partner together to create a podcast that focus on conversations between mother and daughters. But at the same time, I was working on my present podcast, Lessons from Behind My Chair. So we felt like, man, that's impossible. But then the coffee kept coming and the talks and the conversations kept coming. And so the thought of having a podcast with my daughter never left me. And so when I was on my way to the nail salon, the thought came to me, and it came to me in a very intense way. And so I started just thinking about different names that we can come up with for the podcast. And so when I arrived at the nail salon and I sat down and, they started preparing my water for my pedicure. And while I was just sitting there, allowing clues to drop in, I was saying, you know what? I kind of like the name Coffee and Conversations. But then again, other names started coming up, and I was like, Lord, I am just so confused. I said, Lord, help me. But, I was listening while I was thinking. I was also listening to a podcast that was just talking about moving your life forward and what that may look like for some of us. And about 3 seconds after I got so frustrated with trying to come up with a name for the podcast for my daughter and I said, Lord, please help me. About 3 seconds after I said that, the host of the podcast that I was listening to said, Conversations. Man, I could not believe what I heard. And I yelled out Conversations in the nail salon. I just was so excited. I felt like in that moment that God was dropping a clue, that the thought of doing a podcast with my daughter and the idea of naming it Coffee and Conversations was made very clear to me. So I called my daughter and I told her about that experience, and she was thrilled to hear that, because she said she was thinking about the same thing, of how wonderful it would be that her and I can get together and co-host a podcast. So I'm just saying that when we ask God for a thing, don't think that it has to take days, weeks, months to get answers. Sometimes the answers come in seconds. And that was my experience on Thursday, December 1st. Now, I think about the fact that, wow, okay, I have a salon. I'm currently hosting a podcast. I'm currently working on online courses. I'm currently doing other things. So where in the world am I going to be able to fit in another project, another podcast? And you know what? I got to thinking that sometimes we have to do a combination of things. And it's through being obedient and doing the combination of things that we reach a place in our journey in which we are allowed to cross another bridge that opens up more possibilities for us. And in doing so, we expand the space for us to become a bigger, better version of ourselves. And so when we think about all the time that we waste doing things that doesn't lead to anything, why is it so challenging? Why do we have to question when God puts something else on our plate that has more meaning, that has more purpose, that could have more impact? Coupled with the fact that We ask God for more. But sometimes when He gives us more, we want to make excuses to do the work that is required to do it. So what I want to suggest for those of you who are currently busy, to slow down with your busyness and to focus on the things that are more productive. And ask yourself, is this going to get me to my next? Is this going to get me to my next? Is this time snatcher going to get me to my next? And then you answer yes or no. And for all the no answers, I want you to just scratch it off your plate. And the yes answers, I want you to pay more attention to. I want you to consider you could either create a list or you can create a vision board that have all the things, all the thoughts, all the hobbies, all your interests, all your experiences that you feel make up you. And then I want you to be very intentional and zone in on the one common denominator that runs through all these things that make you, you. All the things that help to define you. And if you're very, very careful, if you're very intentional, you'll begin to see a thread, a common denominator amongst all of those things that help to define you. And that becomes your yes. And that becomes the thing that allow you to be more productive in the things or the life that you say you want. I know sometimes we can get confused. I know sometimes we can also get overwhelmed. But I'm telling you, when we become intentional, when we stop and ask for God's guidance, and when we take note through seeing or through hearing or through experiencing some of the clues that God leaves along our path, then we begin to mount up. And then we begin to believe that we can accomplish a thing, even if it requires more. But it's not the more of running to and fro. It's not that kind of more. It's the more that's intentional, that's direct. It's the more that, because we're putting time and thought and energy and effort in it, it will get us to our destination quicker, faster, better than we could ever imagine. So take the time to be clear about what you want. Take the time to listen to the clues that God leaves for you. And continue to believe in yourself. Continue to believe that you can have what you say that you want. And guess what? I'm going to double that portion by believing for you. I'm going to double that portion by holding space for you. And I pray that you have the desires of your heart. And so if you found anything useful in this conversation, and if there's anybody you know that could benefit from this conversation, I want to ask you to pass this podcast on. Okay? And remember, I believe in you, and I'll talk with you later. Okay? Bye.